The first time she met Adrian Voss, she learned something important about humiliation. It does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes dressed in silence, in a pause that lasts a second too long, in eyes that slide past you as if you were never worth focusing on in the first place. She remembered the room more clearly than she wanted to. Glass walls, soft golden lights, the quiet confidence of people who belonged there. She did not. Not yet. She had been 22, freshly graduated, clutching a tablet with hands that trembled just enough to betray her nerves. It was her first real presentation, her first chance to be seen by people who decided futures with a nod or a shrug. Adrian Voss had been seated at the center of the long table, the youngest billionaire on the continent, already a legend. His presence had altered the air in the room. He was not loud. He did not need to be. Power settled on him naturally like gravity. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. When he looked at someone, they straightened instinctively. When it was her turn to speak, she had taken a steadying breath and begun. She knew her material. She had worked nights refining it, days rehearsing it. For the first few minutes, she had almost forgotten where she was. Then she mispronounced a figure. It was a small thing. A single number spoken too quickly, corrected immediately. But the room reacted before she could recover. A ripple of amusement moved through the table. Someone coughed. Someone else smiled behind a hand. Adrian Voss did not laugh. He leaned back slightly in his chair, folded his arms, and tilted his head as if considering something mildly curious. His lips curved, not into a smile, exactly, but something colder, something that felt deliberate. "Is that the final figure?" he asked calmly. "Or should we wait for the accurate version?" The room went quiet. Heat flooded her face. She corrected herself at once, her voice steady by sheer force of will. But the damage was done. She finished the presentation somehow, nodded when dismissed, and walked out with her head held high because pride was the only armor she had left. She told herself she was overreacting, that men like Adrian Voss did not mean harm. They simply did not notice it. But that night, alone in her small apartment, she replayed the moment again and again. The pause, the look, the way he had waited just long enough for everyone to notice her stumble. She decided then that he had enjoyed it. Years passed. Life hardened her in quiet ways. She built a reputation on competence and restraint, on swallowing reactions before they reached her tongue. She learned when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. By the time her name began circulating in professional circles, the girl who had once trembled in front of a boardroom table had long since taught herself how not to show it. She did not expect fate to be careless enough to bring Adrian Voss back into her life. The message arrived on an ordinary afternoon, tucked between routine emails. A project assignment, temporary placement, confidential client. The name sat at the bottom of the page like a challenge she had not agreed to accept. Voss Holdings. Her fingers hovered over the screen. For a moment, she considered declining. She had earned the right to choose her battles. But opportunity had a way of disguising itself as discomfort, and she had not come this far to retreat because of a memory. She accepted. The first day at Voss Holdings confirmed everything she remembered and more. The building rose like a monument to precision. Steel, glass, quiet efficiency. She was escorted through security, past offices that hummed with restrained urgency, and into a conference room that overlooked the city. He was already there. Adrian Voss stood by the window, his back to the room, speaking softly into a phone. Time had sharpened him. His presence was heavier now, more assured. The lines of his suit were impeccable, his posture unyielding. When he turned, ending the call, recognition flickered across his face. It was brief, controlled. Her own reaction was not. She felt it first in her chest, a tightening she had not prepared for. She kept her expression neutral, her spine straight, her face composed. Years of discipline held her steady where memory tried to trip her. "Ms. Hale," he said, his voice even. "You're early." "So are you," she replied. The exchange was polite, professional. On the surface, nothing more. But beneath it, something old stirred, resentment, pride, a memory that refused to stay buried. As the meeting progressed, she spoke when asked, offered insight when appropriate, and remained silent when the room filled with louder voices. Twice, she inhaled sharply, a deep, controlled breath, and swallowed words that pressed against her tongue. Not insults exactly, truths sharpened by history. She caught his eyes on her during one of those moments. He noticed. It was subtle, a slight narrowing of his gaze, a pause that mirrored the one she remembered all too well. But this time, there was no amusement in it. If anything, there was something like curiosity or concern. She looked away first. When the meeting ended, she gathered her notes efficiently. She did not rush. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing anything unsettled. "Ms. Hale," he said as others filed out. A moment. She stopped, slowly, and turned. Her expression was calm, her voice measured. "Yes, Mr. Voss." He studied her in silence, and the weight of his attention pressed against old scars she had never quite erased. She held her ground. "I expect professionalism," he said finally, "from everyone on this project." "So do I," she replied. The words came easily. What did not come easily was the sigh that followed, quiet but unmistakable, as she swallowed everything else she might have said. His eyes lingered on her for a second longer than necessary. "Good," he said. She left the room without another word, unaware that for the first time in years, Adrian Voss watched someone walk away from him and felt something dangerously close to regret. She told herself she would not let him get under her skin again. That promise lasted until the second morning. By then, reality had made itself clear in a dozen quiet ways. The project was not a short consultation, as she had initially assumed. It was an immersive strategic overhaul, one that required her presence on site, long hours, and direct collaboration with Adrian Voss himself. There would be no polite distance, no neatly defined boundaries. She was not an observer brought in to advise and disappear. She was, for the foreseeable future, part of the machinery. Her temporary office sat one floor below his. Glass walls, minimal decor, the city stretching endlessly beyond the windows. Everything about the space was designed to remind people of scale, of how small they were in comparison to the empire being run above their heads. She adapted quickly. She always did. By the third day, her reports were circulating among department heads. By the fourth, her recommendations were being implemented. She spoke with precision, listened more than she talked, and delivered results that could not be ignored. Respect followed, cautious at first, then increasingly sincere. What she did not adapt to was him. Adrian Voss appeared everywhere without seeming to. At meetings she was told he would not attend. In hallways she thought were empty. Behind her chair when she was reviewing data late into the evening. He never hovered, never interrupted. He simply observed, his presence quiet but inescapable, and he watched her closely. She noticed it during a strategy review when a senior executive questioned one of her projections. The challenge was aggressive, dismissive in tone. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused. She inhaled deeply, the breath expanding her chest, and exhaled slowly as she swallowed the sharper reply forming in her mind. She answered calmly instead, dismantling the argument with numbers and logic rather than pride. Across the table, Adrian's gaze sharpened. Later, in the elevator, she caught him studying her reflection in the mirrored walls. Not openly, not intrusively, as if he were assembling a picture from fragments. "You choose your words carefully," he said. The comment was neutral, but it landed too close to truth. "I choose results," she replied. A corner of his mouth lifted, almost imperceptibly. "Most people confuse restraint for weakness. Most people," she said, "are wrong." The doors opened before he could respond. She stepped out without looking back, her heart beating faster than she would ever admit. By the end of the week, it became clear that convenience was not the only reason she had been assigned living quarters on the property. Voss Holdings maintained an executive residence for high-level collaborators during critical projects. Privacy, security, efficiency. She was shown to a suite on the east wing of the estate. Tasteful, elegant, impersonal. It felt less like hospitality and more like a reminder that everything around her belonged to him. That night, She sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. She stared at the city lights beyond the tall windows and wondered when exactly annoyance had turned into something more dangerous. Awareness, anticipation, the faint, unwelcome pull of curiosity. She shook it off and went to sleep. The following evening, the estate lost power. It happened without warning. One moment she was reviewing documents on her tablet. The next the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Outside, a storm raged, rain battering the windows, thunder rolling low and deep. She stood, irritation flaring. She had not come here to play out some gothic inconvenience. She moved toward the door just as it opened. Adrian Voss stood in the hallway, a soft glow from emergency lighting outlining his silhouette. "Backup generators will be online shortly," he said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she replied, though her pulse had spiked at the sudden proximity. "Good." He hesitated, then added, "The West Wing has power. You can work there if you need to." "I'll manage," she said. Then, before she could stop herself, she sighed. Deeply. It was a sound born of fatigue, restraint, and a dozen unsaid thoughts. She caught herself immediately, lips pressing together as if to seal everything back inside. His eyes dropped to her face. "You do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" "That," he replied. "You breathe in like you were about to say something that might cut. Then you stop yourself." Her jaw tightened. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" he asked, not unkindly. Silence stretched between them, charged in a way that made her acutely aware of how close he was standing. Too close. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, subtle and restrained, like everything else about him. "I learned a long time ago," she said carefully, "that not every truth needs to be spoken." His gaze held hers, something unreadable flickering behind it. "And I learned," he said, "that the most dangerous truths are the ones people swallow." The generators hummed back to life, lights flooding the corridor. The moment fractured, reality reasserting itself. He stepped back first. "There's a board review tomorrow morning," he said, the professional mask sliding back into place. "Be prepared for resistance." "I always am," she replied. He nodded once and turned away. She closed the door and leaned against it, her composure finally cracking. Her heart was racing, her thoughts tangled. She had not planned for this, for the way his presence unsettled her, for the way his attention felt less like scrutiny and more like something else entirely. What she did not see was Adrian standing at the end of the hall, pausing as if considering turning back. For the first time since their reunion, he wondered whether the distance she kept from him was not arrogance or defiance, but armor, and whether he was the reason she wore it so well. By the second week, the tension between them had settled into a rhythm neither of them named aloud. They disagreed often, sometimes sharply, but never without purpose. Their conversations became precise exchanges of insight and challenge, each pushing the other towards something better. Meetings ended with solutions no one else had seen coming. Executives stopped questioning her presence. They started waiting for her conclusions. Adrian noticed everything. He noticed how she arrived earlier than required and stayed later than expected. How she never raised her voice, even when provoked. How she listened fully before responding, as if weighing not just words but intention. And he noticed the moments she paused, breath held, as if restraining something sharp and honest that the room might not be ready to hear. Respect came first. Something else followed close behind. It unsettled him. The revelation came on a night meant to be forgettable. The board had insisted on a private dinner to mark the midpoint of the project. It was held in one of the estate's formal rooms, all soft lighting and polished wood, attended by a small circle of long-standing associates. The atmosphere loosened as the evening progressed. Glasses refilled, laughter grew louder. She sat near the end of the table, composed as always, participating without performing. Adrian watched her from across the room, telling himself his attention was professional. He did not believe it. Halfway through the meal, one of the older board members leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, his tone nostalgic and careless. "Funny how life circles back," he said. "Seeing you here, Ms. Hale, Reminds me of that old pitch event years ago. Adrian talked about you for weeks after that. The room went quiet. She froze. Her fingers tightened around her glass, knuckles whitening. I'm sorry, she said, her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. The man chuckled, oblivious to the shift he had caused. He was impressed. Said you had potential most people twice your age lacked. Couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head. Her gaze flicked slowly to Adrian. He had gone still. That's enough, Adrian said, his voice controlled but firm. But the damage was done. She did not speak again for the rest of the evening. She excused herself early, citing fatigue, and left the room with her spine straight and her expression unreadable. Only when she reached the quiet of the corridor did the weight of it crash down on her. Impressed. Weeks. She had remembered humiliation. He had remembered admiration. The truth rearranged something deep inside her, unsettling and sharp. Memories resurfaced uninvited. The angle of his head, the lack of laughter, the way he had watched her as if she were a puzzle he could not quite solve. She had built her certainty on a single interpretation, and now it cracked. She did not sleep. The next morning, she requested a private meeting. Adrian was already waiting when she arrived. The office was flooded with light, the city stretching endlessly behind him. He stood as she entered, his expression cautious, as if he already knew why she was there. Close the door, she said. He did. She did not sit. Did you ever enjoy humiliating me? She asked, the question stripped of accusation, but heavy with years of restraint. No, he said immediately. Never. Then why did you let me walk away believing you did? Silence filled the space between them. He exhaled slowly, as if choosing truth over comfort. Because I was younger than I had any right to be, he said, and unprepared for the weight people assigned to my reactions. I hesitated. I chose control instead of clarity, and I regretted it the moment you left. Her throat tightened. She did not interrupt. I admired you, he continued quietly. Your composure, your intelligence. I wanted to speak to you afterward. Apologize if I had unsettled you. But you disappeared, and then time passed, and then I became someone who does not chase ghosts. The honesty in his voice struck deeper than any defense would have. She crossed her arms, not defensively, but to steady herself. I built my entire understanding of you on that moment. I know, he said, and I am sorry. The apology was simple. It did not ask forgiveness. It did not excuse itself. It existed on its own. She nodded once, absorbing it. The anger she had carried for years loosened, replaced by something more dangerous than resentment. Understanding. I don't know what to do with this, she admitted. You don't have to do anything, he replied. Not yet. Their eyes held, the air between them heavy with unspoken possibility. For the first time, the silence was not sharp. It was fragile. She turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I never lacked confidence. I only lacked context. His expression softened just slightly. When she left, Adrian remained standing long after the door closed, the past finally laid bare between them. And somewhere between regret and relief, something irreversible began. The distance between them did not return to what it had been before. It changed instead, thinning into something charged and careful, like a wire pulled too tight. They worked more closely after that conversation, though neither of them named the shift. Meetings extended beyond their agendas. Decisions were made with fewer words, their understanding of each other now instinctive. Where she once guarded herself with precision, she now allowed pauses. Where he once kept emotional neutrality like armor, he let warmth slip through in glances he did not always catch in time. And still, she sighed. It happened most often when others spoke foolishly. A shallow breath in through her nose, then a deeper one out, measured, restrained. It was not annoyance exactly. It was restraint. The conscious choice to swallow words sharp enough to cut. Adrian noticed every time. He noticed it during a strategy review when a junior executive dismissed a risk she had flagged, waving it off with careless confidence. She inhaled, exhaled slowly, then responded with calm logic that dismantled his argument without ever raising her voice. He noticed it when a supplier praised him excessively and refer to her as his assistant. The sigh was almost imperceptible then, but her eyes darkened for a fraction of a second before she corrected the man with polite precision. He noticed it most when the sigh was followed by silence. One afternoon, after a particularly long session with the legal team, the room finally emptied, leaving just the two of them. Papers lay scattered across the table, sunlight slanting low through the windows. "You do that," Adrian said, breaking the quiet. She looked up. "Do what?" "Sigh. Deeply. Right before you decide not to say something devastatingly honest." Her lips curved despite herself. "That obvious?" "To me," he replied. "Very." She leaned back in her chair, considering him. "Some people confuse restraint with weakness. I prefer not to educate them unless necessary." "I would like to hear it," he said. "What you almost say." Her brow lifted slightly. "That would be dangerous." "Why?" "Because you might agree with me." A beat passed. His smile was slow, deliberate. "I often do." That was when the air shifted again. They began sharing moments that were not strictly professional. Late night coffee in the study instead of separate offices. Quiet dinners when schedules overlapped. Conversations drifting from architecture and business into memory, philosophy, failures they rarely discussed aloud. She told him about the early years after that pitch event, the projects she took to prove herself, the mentors who underestimated her, the nights she questioned whether silence had cost her opportunities. He told her about the loneliness of ascension, how people listened to him without hearing him, how control had become habit, and habit had hardened into isolation. Neither of them spoke of attraction, but it threaded through everything. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly, thunder cracking so close it rattled the windows. Power flickered briefly, then steadied. She stood near the glass, watching rain blur the city into abstraction. "I used to think storms were chaos," she said quietly. "Now I think they're honesty. Nothing pretends to be calm." He joined her, close enough that she could feel his warmth without touching. "You don't pretend," he said. "You choose." She turned slightly, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Their eyes met, held. The space between them felt suddenly fragile, like it might collapse under the weight of one wrong movement. She exhaled that familiar deep sigh, but this time it was different, softer, vulnerable. "You're doing it again," he murmured. "This time," she said, "I'm swallowing fear, not words." He did not move closer. He did not pull away. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's what frightens me." The next test came from outside. The press caught wind of the project's success faster than anticipated. Speculation followed, then scrutiny. An article questioned her role, implying favoritism, hinting at impropriety without evidence. She read it alone in her room, anger sharp and familiar. By the time she reached his office, her composure was flawless, but her eyes burned. "They think I'm here because of you," she said without preamble, placing the article on his desk. His jaw tightened as he read. "This is unacceptable. It's predictable," she countered, "and dangerous." He looked up. "For you. For us," she corrected softly. The word lingered between them. "I can shut this down," he said. "Publicly clarify your credentials." In the speculation, she shook her head. "That gives it power, and it places me behind you again." "What do you suggest?" he asked. "I stand on my work," she said. "You stand beside me, not in front." His gaze held hers, respect unmistakable. "Done." The response was measured, factual, unembellished. Her portfolio spoke for itself. The noise quieted. The insinuations faded. What remained was the undeniable truth that they were no longer unaffected by each other. That night, they found themselves on the terrace again. The city stretched wide and bright below. The storm had washed the air clean. She leaned against the railing, hair lifting slightly in the breeze. "You could have made this easier," she said. "You didn't." "I won't ever," he replied, standing beside her. "Not at the cost of diminishing you." She looked at him, then really looked. The man who once represented a single moment of doubt now stood as something entirely different. Her breath caught. She sighed, but did not swallow anything this time. "If I stop holding back," she said quietly, "things will change." Yes, he said. They already have. Silence fell, heavy and electric. His hand rested on the railing near hers, not touching, but close enough to promise. She turned to him, heart steady, voice soft but certain. I am done mistaking restraint for safety. His answer was just as quiet, and I am done pretending I do not see you. The city hummed below them, indifferent and vast, as the last fragile barrier between them began to crack. The shift was unmistakable after that night. Nothing overt changed, yet everything felt different. The air around them carried intention now, no longer restrained by misinterpretation or fear. Where silence once held distance, it now held promise. Where her sighs once swallowed words, they now marked moments of decision. The invitation came 2 days later. A private dinner, hosted at the upper terrace of the estate, intended for investors and long-standing partners. Formal, controlled, visible. She read the message twice, understanding the unspoken weight behind it. This was not a request for her presence. It was a declaration. She accepted. When she arrived that evening, the city was dressed in gold and shadow, lights flickering like something alive. The terrace had been transformed, subtle elegance, no excess. Candles glowed along the railings, the skyline rising beyond them like a promise. Adrian saw her the moment she stepped out. She wore simplicity sharpened into power, the kind that did not seek attention but commanded it. Conversations faltered as she moved through the space, greeting guests with calm confidence, her presence anchoring the room. You look, he began when he reached her, then paused, choosing honesty. Remarkable. Thank you, she replied, the slightest warmth touching her eyes. Throughout the evening, they orbited each other with deliberate ease. He stayed close without claiming her. She engaged freely, her intellect on full display. When partners asked about design decisions, she answered without hesitation. When one man lingered too long, speaking over her rather than to her, Adrian intervened with seamless authority, redirecting the conversation without a word of explanation. Later, she leaned toward him, her voice low. You didn't have to do that. Yes, he said simply. I did. He noticed her breath catch before she smiled. By the time dinner concluded, the terrace had thinned. Laughter softened, goodbyes exchanged. The city below pulsed steadily, indifferent to the quiet intensity gathering above it. When they were finally alone, the silence felt deliberate. I wanted you here, Adrian said, breaking it. Not for optics, for truth. She met his gaze. Say it then. He stepped closer, close enough that the line between them blurred. I have watched you choose restraint over reaction, dignity over defense, excellence over ease. I have watched you swallow words to spare others comfort they did not earn. And I have wanted, more than I should, to be the person you do not have to hold back with. Her breath left her slowly, a sigh deep and unguarded. I have spent years believing silence kept me safe, she said. But silence only delayed honesty. He lifted a hand, stopping just short of her face. May I? She nodded. His touch was gentle, reverent. Fingers brushing her jaw, thumb warm against her skin. The contact sent a quiet shiver through her, not of urgency, but recognition. You do not owe me caution, he said, but I owe you patience. Her hands rose to rest lightly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. And if I choose more, then I choose it with you. Their foreheads touched, the space between breaths narrowing. When he kissed her, it was slow, deliberate, nothing like urgency. It carried the weight of years and the promise of intention. She responded without hesitation, her hands tightening slightly, her sigh dissolving into him. They did not rush. When they parted, her eyes were bright, her expression both softened and resolute. This changes things. Yes, he agreed, but not the way you fear. Later, in the quiet of his private study, they spoke without walls. About expectations, about visibility, about the scrutiny that would follow, about the risks of blending something fragile with something powerful. She did not shy away. I will not be hidden, she said. I would never ask you to be, he replied. and I will not be diminished." He met her words without flinching. "You will not be." The night deepened around them. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, something settled into place. When they finally stood together by the window, his arm around her, her head resting lightly against his shoulder, she released one last deep breath. This time, it was not restraint. It was surrender to clarity, to truth, to the choice she was finally allowing herself to make. And he held her as if he understood exactly what that meant. The morning arrived crisp and bright, but the city lights of the previous night still seemed to linger in her mind, clinging to the edges of her thoughts like a delicate memory she wasn't ready to release. Sienna moved through the penthouse quietly, careful not to disturb the calm that had settled around them after yesterday's revelations. Yet calm was a fragile thing when Adrian was involved. The man exuded energy even in silence, a presence that commanded attention even without speaking. She found him in the kitchen, already dressed in a sharp suit, reviewing documents with a focused intensity. When he looked up and saw her standing there, the tension in his shoulders eased into something warmer, something distinctly softer. "Morning," he said, voice low, carrying that same mixture of command and intimacy that had made her pulse race for days. "Morning," she replied, smiling despite herself. The morning felt like the first page of a book she had longed to write, one in which every word mattered, every pause was deliberate, and every glance held meaning. Coffee in hand, they moved through their morning ritual together. No words were wasted, no touch unnecessary. When she brushed past him to grab her mug, his hand caught hers lightly, fingers threading together as if to anchor both of them in the reality of the present. She squeezed once, a small signal that said she was ready to follow, ready to step fully into what had begun between them. The breakfast was quiet, filled with the comfortable hum of easy familiarity. But beneath it lay the unspoken excitement of discovery. Two people finally finding a rhythm long delayed by fear and misunderstanding. Every glance, every brush of a hand, every shared sip of coffee became a declaration. This was no fleeting passion. This was careful, deliberate intention, and it thrilled her. Later, as she prepared for a meeting with a major client, Adrian stayed nearby, hovering just beyond the threshold of professionalism. When she hesitated over a design detail, he leaned closer, his voice soft but firm. "Trust yourself. They will see the brilliance you already know is there." She nodded, heart hammering. His faith in her was intoxicating, more powerful than any accolades or contracts she could earn on her own. The meeting went flawlessly, every client impressed by her vision, her clarity, and her confidence. But she felt most alive not because of the success itself, but because Adrian had been there, a quiet anchor and a constant reminder that she was never alone in her triumphs or her fears. By evening, the penthouse was quiet again, save for the distant hum of the city below. Sienna and Adrian found themselves on the terrace once more, the sky stretching endlessly above them. The air was cooler now, tinged with the faint scent of night blooms from a nearby garden. He took her hand in his, holding it against his chest. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice low, his forehead resting against hers. "The what?" she whispered. "This," he said, sweeping his other hand through her hair, brushing back strands that had fallen across her face. "The certainty, the rightness of this moment, of us." She closed her eyes, allowing herself to absorb it, every heartbeat syncing with his. "I do," she admitted. "I didn't think I ever would. I thought fear and caution would always win." He smiled, a slow, assured expression that made the world around them disappear. "Fear tried, but you chose trust, and I will spend every day proving it's worth it." That night, they moved through the penthouse with a quiet intimacy, brushing past each other in shared spaces, their touches deliberate yet gentle, the kind that spoke of deeper commitment rather than fleeting desire. Finally, they settled in the living room, a bottle of wine between them. The city sprawled below like an endless canvas. Their conversation ranged from trivialities to confessions, each word layering the foundation of something lasting. She learned new sides of him, and he, in turn, revealed vulnerabilities he had hidden even from himself. Hours passed unnoticed until the clock chimed midnight, the city lights flickering like stars caught in an urban sky. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath, a rhythm that spoke louder than any words could. "Forever," he murmured, lips brushing her hair. She smiled against him, warmth spreading through her entire body. "Forever," she echoed, her own promise as much to herself as to him. And in that moment, all the years of misunderstanding, longing, and fear dissolved into nothing but clarity. She had chosen, he had chosen, and together they were stepping into a life built on truth, trust, and undeniable love. The city below might continue in its chaos. The world might continue to demand appearances and perfection. But up here, above it all, they had discovered something rare and infinitely precious. A love that had waited 9 years to be recognized, nurtured, and finally embraced. As they held each other in the quiet glow of the city lights, Sienna realized that no sigh needed to be swallowed anymore. Words, feelings, and touches were free now. Free to be shared, free to be felt. And with Adrian, she would never hold back again. The night ended with a gentle kiss, soft and full of promise, sealing the commitment that had been years in the making. And as they finally drifted into sleep, entwined and unafraid, the penthouse became more than a home. It became a sanctuary, a place where love, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable could flourish without restraint. Tomorrow would come with its challenges, its demands, and its chaos. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, everything was exactly as it should be.